Accessibility options in video games are extremely important. They can allow people with disabilities to experience a game without dealing with the usual struggles of their disability. Over the past few years, it seems that companies are becoming increasingly aware of accommodating for different disabilities in gaming. But there is one type of accessibility option that I would like to discuss with you all today, as it affects me directly. And that option is colorblind modes. 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women are colorblind. Now that may not sound like a lot at first, but then you realize that means there's an estimated 300 million people who are colorblind. And on top of that, there are tons of games that use color as a way to communicate information with the player nowadays. An easy example of this is in the Arkham games. Enemies who are unarmed have this light blue color, whereas enemies who have guns, they have this orange color on them. And pretty much every competitive team game out there also uses color as a way to give information to players. So if you have trouble distinguishing between certain colors, like colorblind individuals do, it can be really frustrating to play some of these games. Like League of Legends already makes me want to throw my computer out the window, and now you're telling me I can't see shit on the screen either? And this is where colorblind modes come in. You go to your settings, turn it on, and bam! Problem solved. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Not all colorblind modes were created equally. Some of them are really good, don't get me wrong, but some also really suck. So let's take a look at some examples to start off. Let's look at... Now real quick, I should probably mention what type of colorblindness that I have, since a lot of my own opinions on this subject are from the point of view of someone with red-green colorblindness. There are several other types of colorblindness, and each type has issues distinguishing between different colors, but the games that I think did colorblind modes well are good because it doesn't matter what kind of colorblindness you have, it should still fix whatever issues you have with the visuals. Which brings me to my first example, Chromagun. Chromagun's a puzzle game that is similar to Portal in a lot of ways, but instead of shooting portals, its main mechanic centers around mixing and matching colors to get through levels. As you can imagine, this would be really tough for someone who is colorblind to play, since it entirely revolves around being able to distinguish between different colors. But the developers of the game realized this, so you can just click colorblind mode in the settings, and boom, these symbols are added to the colors to indicate which color is which. And when you combine colors, the symbols also combine. This simple change makes the game go from being completely unplayable for someone who's colorblind to being totally accessible instead. Multiplayer first-person shooter games pretty much always need some kind of colorblind mode in them. This is especially true in games where a fraction of a second can make a difference in whether you get killed or not. Valorant and Overwatch are two FPS games that I feel have made really effective colorblind modes. Some games will just put a filter over everything and call it a day, which is actually what Overwatch originally did. But now both of these games allow the player to customize the outline color for enemies and their teammates. But you may be wondering, why is changing the outlines for enemies more effective than just putting on a filter? Well, there's a few reasons. For one, it doesn't make your game look worse visually. Filters make everything look different, whereas changing the outlines only affects enemies. In addition to this, in an FPS game, enemies are usually only indicated by their silhouette. So if you have trouble seeing them, you're in big trouble. UI elements usually have other indicators than just color to give you information. And lastly, a colorblind mode like Overwatch's is nice because the player gets to choose whatever color they want for each specific outline. Filters are usually a preset change and there's no customizability. So if it doesn't really work out for you, then there's nothing you can even do about it. Another effective colorblind mode is actually not needing one in the first place. The Outer Worlds is a game where both of the co-directors of the game were colorblind, and so the game was designed in a way that you would never be at a disadvantage if you were colorblind. And this brings up a good point, which is not every game needs colorblind support. It entirely depends on how it was designed originally. Going back to Chromagun, that game was designed to use colors to solve puzzles, and because of that, the developers needed to add in colorblind support to the game. This is where some games fall short of accounting for colorblind people. Their games are designed in a way in which color is used to convey information, but the colorblind modes that they have don't address it meaningfully. Which leads me to... a great example of a game that has a colorblind mode in it, but it doesn't really work as well as it should, is Among Us. Among Us blew up in popularity last year, and one of the most requested features for the game was colorblind support. When it was added though, it only really made a difference for doing tasks like the wire one. It still didn't do anything to make it easier to distinguish between the different playable colors the game has. Take a look at this chart real quick. This shows what the different colors in Among Us look like to people with different types of colorblindness. If you look at the top, you see normal vision and protanomaly. Those may look like two different images to you, but those look like the exact same image to me, and that's what it's like every time I play Among Us. There have been several times where I've said something like, hey guys, I think blue did it, and then everyone looks at me and says, no one's blue in this game. You can imagine how that went. If Valorant and Overwatch show how you should do a colorblind mode in an FPS game, Apex Legends shows how you shouldn't do it. For starters, it only changes the colors of elements on the UI in the game. So actual enemy outlines or even the reticle on your gun, none of that actually gets changed when you turn on colorblind mode. And on top of that, when I turned on colorblind mode, I actually had more difficulty distinguishing between the rare and epic items in the game, and when I had colorblind mode off, I could actually tell the difference between the two perfectly. And this is one of the worst feelings you can have as someone who's colorblind, when you turn on the colorblind mode and it's actually worse than if you just left it off in the first place. It can be really frustrating to have colorblind modes in games that don't really fix any of the issues that actually matter. But at least they're still trying to improve the game for those with a disability, because there are some games that just don't even have colorblind options to begin with, which leads me to
red thorns, blue flower, red thorns, blue flower, red thorns. This would be so much easier if I wasn't colorblind. Blue flower, red thorns, blue flower.
Rainbow Six Siege came out in December of 2015, and it wasn't until earlier this year that they finally added in some type of colorblind mode. I remember trying to play this game a few years ago, and it was an absolute nightmare trying to play it while colorblind. For one, all the reticles on the guns in this game were red or green, which, I mean, that was a problem for pretty obvious reasons, don't you think? Also, most of the maps in Siege are indoors with very dim lighting, and for me personally, seeing red on top of black is really tough. And combine that with the fact that kill times in this game are really quick, you have a recipe for losing my fucking mind trying to play this game. Dead by Daylight had a similar situation to Rainbow Six Siege, where it had been out for almost 5 years and there was still no colorblind support at all. That was until a dev was talking on his live stream about the issue, and, well, I'll just let you listen to what he had to say.
Alright, JC, it's getting really boring just blabbing about colorblind mode all the time. We've heard it a million times, we know. Continuing to badger us about it isn't going to change anything. If it gets done, it'll get done when we have time to do it, or if somebody decides that it's something that should be done. You know, we know that a lot of players want it. We know it's not a small number. We get it.
You know, maybe people wouldn't have badgered you so much to add colorblind support if you had just added it to the game in the first place. I mean, this game had been out for almost 5 years. That's half a decade. And the best part is that about a week later, the developers announced that they would actually be adding in a colorblind mode to the game. So I guess they figured it was worth it after all, huh? But this does bring up the question for both of these games, and that's why did it take so long to add in colorblind mode? It doesn't seem to be something that's technologically that difficult, and there's plenty of games that have already implemented it, so it's not like trying to figure out a way to implement it is necessarily that big of an ask. I think that some of the reluctance to add colorblind modes to these competitive online multiplayer games is the fact that you're going to always have some people who are going to try and find some way that they can use the colorblind settings to exploit the game or gain some sort of advantage. You will always have those people who use certain skins or use certain cosmetics that allow them to blend in with the background more or have a smaller hitbox or whatever. An example of this is in Fortnite, where professional players actually use colorblind modes so that they can see into the storm a lot easier, which gives them somewhat of an advantage in seeing enemies from far away. But despite all this, I still don't think that it's a good enough reason to not include a colorblind mode in your game. There's a huge difference between using something like actual hacks or cheats in a game and just turning on some setting that allows you to have more visual clarity. You're talking about giving up a sizable chunk of players from wanting to play your game, also that you can keep some other players from getting a very minor advantage in a game. And if non-colorblind players are turning on colorblind mode so that they can have more visual clarity, then maybe your game just didn't even have good visual clarity to begin with. Overall, I think if a game needs colorblind support, then they should just add it. There's really no reason not to nowadays. And when you do add it, you'll be getting a lot of support from colorblind players out there, because it really means a lot to be able to play a game without being at a disadvantage all the time because of a disability you have. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed watching my video. I really enjoyed making it. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and also smash that like button. Wait, smash? Oh yeah, that reminds me, Nintendo? What the fuck is this?